By the latter part of 1944, the tide of war in Europe had shifted dramatically against Germany. The Allies were closing up on it from both directions, west and east. The triumphant Allied landings in Normandy on D-Day on June 6, 1944, followed by the liberation of France, had brought Allied forces to the very western border of Germany. Meanwhile, in the east, Soviet troops were making relentless progress, having already freed much of Eastern Europe from German control. Confronted with a looming threat of defeat, Hitler sought a daring maneuver to change the war's course. In 1940, Hitler had unleashed an attack through the dense Ardennes forest into Belgium and France. This campaign ended in a remarkable victory for Hitler. 4 years later, in the year 1944, he planned for history to repeat itself. Once again, German forces would advance through the thick woods of the Ardennes to strike the enemies by surprise. Hitler believed a surprise attack here could catch the Allies off guard. He aimed to allow German forces to seize the strategic port of Antwerp. This, he believed, would split the American and British alliance. Thus, Hitler hoped he could easily negotiate a separate peace with the vanquished Western Allies. This would in turn free Germany to focus on the Eastern Front, Germany's main target, its main enemy, the Soviet Union. But was Hitler successful in this gamble? Not at all. The relentless American resistance forced the German advance to slow down, but the Allies had an ace up their sleeve. From the skies, they unleashed a devastating attack, obliterating the German forces. The Germans had managed to carve a bulge into the Allied line, giving the battle its infamous name. Yet, by the end of January, that bulge was sealed shut. The Allies now had a clear path into the heart of Germany. This audacious gamble of Hitler ended in a disaster for him. So why did the Germans fail? What went wrong? Why couldn't they replicate their lightning success of 1940? After all, this was 1944, and the circumstances surrounding this battle had changed. Let's see how. John S. D. Eisenhower writes in his book, The Bitter Woods, the Ardennes campaign of 1944-45 was only one in a series of difficult engagements in the battle for Europe. Nevertheless, it can be said that the Ardennes campaign epitomized them all, for it was here that American and German combat soldiers met in the decisive struggle that broke the back of the Nazi war machine. So what was this war? How did it start? In the summer of 1944, men from Heinrich Himmler's Protection Squadron, or the SS, hunted down disloyal German generals, while Allied forces stormed the Normandy beachheads, pushing into northern France. German troops, planning a massive counterattack, faced disaster. Trapped in the Falaise pocket, they suffered a crushing defeat. The Germans retreated from northern France. A resistance uprising then erupted in Paris. Hitler gave orders to his senior commanders that to take revenge they should destroy Paris. But these commanders turned a deaf ear to Hitler's vengeful orders and spared the city. On August 25, 1944, free French troops liberated this city. Meanwhile, General George Patton's U.S. Third Army raced eastward toward Germany. Their advance was so rapid that they even risked running out of fuel. The American and British-Canadian success continued. Verdun, Dieppe, Artois, Rouen, Abbeville, Brussels, and Antwerp were all liberated. Simultaneously, Operation Dragoon saw Allied troops invade southern France by sea, pushing north to join General Patton. By mid-September, American troops reached the Siegfried Line, Germany's formidable western defensive fortifications. The stage was set for the final push into Germany. The Battle of the Bulge was about to begin. By now, Hitler had lost over 500,000 soldiers in the West. The Allies seemed unstoppable. German commanders braced for the inevitable invasion of their beloved fatherland. But then, the Allied advance unexpectedly slowed and stopped. The Western Allies needed to regroup. Supply lines were dangerously overstretched, hampering the delivery of vital war materials, including Patton's gasoline. Field Marshal Montgomery needed to recover after the failure of Operation Market Garden. This bold airborne assault in September aimed to break through German lines in southern Holland at Ardennes, capture a crucial bridge, and advance into Germany's industrial core. However, British and American forces landed amidst the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, coincidentally stationed there for refitting and resupply. The outcome was a disastrous failure, resulting in nearly 8,000 casualties. Hitler saw a chance to strike. Instead of allowing the Western Allies to regroup, he decided to gamble. Despite his exhaustion, his old instincts resurfaced. He pinpointed a location on the map and committed everything, all forces, all equipment. His generals were shocked to see his target for a bold new offensive. It was the Ardennes forest. This target was reminiscent of the Blitzkrieg that had overwhelmed the French army 4 years prior. He believed that the Allies would not expect a major offensive in this difficult terrain. His strategy was to exploit the foggy mid-December weather to thrust all his troops through the lightly defended Ardennes forest. Then his men would cross the River Meuse and finally advance northward to seize Antwerp in Belgium within a week. But this gamble came with significant risks. Hitler would have to divert thousands of soldiers from the Eastern Front, where 300 Soviet divisions were preparing to invade Germany, and he would then use these men for his Western offensive. To Hitler, the gamble was worth it. It offered a chance to divide the formidable American army and, amidst the ensuing chaos, crush British and Canadian positions along the Belgian-Dutch border. Capturing Antwerp would further strip the Allies of their sole forward support post. Hitler believed a shocking victory would then drive a wedge between the British 21st and the American 12th Army groups, collapsing the Western Alliance. Once this barrier separated the two armies, the German army could inflict casualties on the British similar to the levels of World War I. This would allow him to transfer forces to the Russian front to stop the Soviet invasion. But Hitler's generals were not too excited about his plans. Field Marshals Walter Model and Gerd von Rundstedt, chosen to command the offensive, were skeptical. They knew they lacked the manpower and equipment. Walter Model, one of Hitler's favorites, reportedly stated, "This plan hasn't got a damn leg to stand on." Rundstedt later stated, "If we had reached the Meuse, we should have got down on our knees and thanked God, let alone try to reach Antwerp." But Hitler cited Frederick the Great, who had launched a surprise attack against a superior force and won. Rundstedt and Model, fearing the waste of their dwindling resources, proposed a smaller, more strategic plan. They envisioned a double-wing envelopment east of the Meuse River, aiming to trap up to 5 American divisions. But Hitler was resolute. The Ardennes offensive would proceed as planned, though the start date was pushed from December 1st to December 16th. The forces assembled for the Ardennes were formidable. The 5th and 6th Panzer Armies were the primary maneuver units on the battlefield. The 5th Panzer Army had a longer route and was not the main effort. It had 7 divisions, including 3 Panzer divisions. The 2nd, the Panzerlehr, and the 116th all had excellent reputations. Its commander, General Hasso von Montefel, was a renowned armor officer. The 5th Panzer had crucial objectives, like securing road to Bastogne, a key transportation node. The 6th Panzer Army, led by General Dietrich, was the heaviest force. It was the main effort of the offensive. This was because it was on the shortest route to Antwerp. The army had 6 divisions and an army brigade. Over half of this force was elite units. Dietrich's army included the 1st SS Panzer Division, the 12th SS Panzer Division, the 3rd Parachute Division, and the 150th Panzer Brigade. Each SS division had 22,000 men and the latest German equipment. Positioned on the southern shoulder, General Erich Brandenberger's 7th Army was tasked with protecting the left flank of the advance. Planners anticipated a counterthrust from Patton's 3rd Army once the offensive began. But the 7th Army had limited assets. It had no armored divisions, limited firepower, and few mechanized units. As German units had little time to prepare for the Ardennes offensive, secrecy was paramount. Chiefs of Staff of the 7th Army and the 5th and 6th Panzer Armies were briefed on November 6, 1944. German Army commanders were briefed on December 2nd. Division commanders were notified at the end of the first week in December. Subordinate commanders received their briefs just days before the offensive. Such late notification was not a recipe for success, but secrecy demanded last-minute notification. During the briefing, commanders were informed that the key factors in this attack should be, first, surprise, and next, speed. For this offensive to succeed, both were crucial. In planning the battle, German strategists made a critical assumption. They believed that for about a week, the weather would be so poor that Allied tactical air forces would struggle to disrupt German movements. This assumption, they believed, would play a significant role in their victory. In addition, the Germans used deceptive tactics to keep the Allies in the dark. They sent fake radio messages, spread false rumors, and relied on secret face-to-face conversations. 3 armies, including 12 panzer divisions, moved into position quietly to avoid detection. Confusion was also crucial. Hitler devised a plan involving SS spy master Otto Skorzeny. He trained 2,000 German commandos to act like American soldiers. Using captured uniforms and jeeps, they aimed to confuse U.S. troops. They gave bad directions, mixed up road signs, killed dispatch riders, cut phone wires, and spread panic by depicting a hopeless situation. On the other side, the Allies were oblivious of the German plans. The Anglo-Canadian 12th Army Group had no clue what was coming. The U.S. 8th Corps, that was commanded by General Middleton, was also in the dark. On the eve of the German offensive, the 12th Army Group commander was obsessed with the Ruhr dams, Schwammenol and Erft. These were crucial points in the Ruhr Valley Dam system. In November 1944, the Allies launched Operation Queen. Their goal was crossing the Ruhr River, capturing the dams of Schwammenol and Erft, and then pushing forward to the Rhine. The U.S. General Omar Bradley ordered General Courtney to attack. The attack started strong, but the next day it stalled. The heavy German resistance caused this slowdown, especially in the Hürtgen forest, through which the main thrust of the offensive was carried out. By mid-December, the Allies finally reached the Ruhr, but the Germans, on the other hand, were preparing something more massive than this. On the night of December 15th, the Wehrmacht positioned 20 divisions, their target 99th, 28th, and 106th Infantry Divisions in a classic surprise attack. At 5:30 a.m. on December 16, 1944, the action began. Hitler struck. This was the largest ground campaign fought by the U.S. Army in the Second World War. This was the Battle of the Bulge, the Ardennes Offensive, or what the Germans called Wacht am Rhein, Operation Watch on the Rhine. Hitler's operation erupted with a 90-minute artillery barrage using 1,600 artillery pieces across an 85-mile front in the Ardennes. The weather was their ally, grounding Allied air power. It seemed they had a chance. The German High Command, OKW, sent a formidable force for the operation, including over 200,000 troops, 1,000 tanks, and 1,900 artillery pieces. The German offensive, Watch on the Rhine, had 2 crucial goals. First, achieve surprise across the American front. Second, dislodge the American defenders from their positions along Skyline Drive and reach the far side of the Clerve River. German intelligence was accurate. American defenses were thin. The initial breakthrough was possible. Speed was essential. Rapid movement was key to success. If the Germans moved swiftly, they could reach their objectives before Allied air commanders could respond. Ground defenses could be reinforced. Reaching Antwerp depended on speed and luck. On the other side, there were only 6 American divisions, among which 3 were inexperienced, defended the area. The rest were tired men sent to recuperate in what had been the quietest sector of the Western Front. They watched in amazement as 2,500 tanks and self-propelled guns, along with 18 infantry divisions, advanced over snow-covered ground. Outnumbered 3-1 and with no air support due to heavy fog, the Americans were in a terrible jam. Some retreated in disorder, others held their ground, falling back only at the last moment. The commander of the 12th Army, Omar Bradley, was away from his headquarters. He was in Paris, pleading for more infantry. Eisenhower was getting his 5th star. The crisis was unfolding. Bradley and Eisenhower were unaware. The day was pleasant and Eisenhower's promotion was the highlight, but not for too long. Dusk. Major General Kenneth Strong interrupted. The Germans had attacked, he informed. They had penetrated American lines. Bradley and Eisenhower were initially unconcerned. Late in the evening, they moved to the Situation Room. Bradley assessed the map. He thought it was a spoiling attack. Eisenhower was sharper. "That's no spoiling attack," he snapped. He recommended reinforcements. 2 armored divisions were needed. Bradley was concerned. Eisenhower suggested to Bradley that he use the 7th Armored Division from the U.S. 9th Army and the 10th Armored Division from Patton's 3rd Army. When Bradley expressed considerable concern about Eisenhower's recommendation, Eisenhower overruled him. The urgency was clear. The German success continued for 5 misty days, creating a 50-mile westward bulge in the lines, giving the battle its name. American losses included the mass surrender of 7,500 soldiers, the worst defeat for the U.S. in Europe. At Malmedy, 81 unarmed American prisoners of war were shot by Waffen-SS troops. Meanwhile, Skorzeny imposters caused disruption as planned. Their overall impact was limited, but one team's capture by suspicious Americans had a huge impact. During interrogation, they revealed details of the commando mission. News spread that Germans were masquerading as Americans, creating widespread mistrust. This was true. As a result, the Americans began asking each other trivial questions to identify their men from those of the enemy masked as them. At the front lines, General Hodges was most affected. His D2 warned of German capabilities, but to him, the Ardennes seemed safe. December 13th, Hodges asked Bradley for 2 more divisions. Bradley refused. Hodges was uneasy. December 16th, Hodges focused on the 5th Corps' attack on the Rohr Dam. News of the German attack reached him. He refused to cancel the 5th Corps' mission. December 17th, Hodges and his staff realized the gravity of the situation. The First Army was in trouble. The situation was worsening for the Americans. At this moment, 2 senior officers emerged who showcased a solid understanding of the battlefield: Eisenhower and his old colleague Patton. Patton was the first to see the danger in the Ardennes. He ordered his intelligence officer, Colonel Oscar Koch, to track the buildup of any significant enemy armored formations. Koch tracked enemy movements. He reported 8 to 9 German armored divisions. He also identified some parachute and Panzer Grenadier units. Koch was worried about a possible counterattack. Late November, Patton noted Bradley's and Hodges' mistake. Lieutenant General Troy Middleton's units were static in Ardennes. Koch alerted Patton. The problem was Middleton's area was clear. Eisenhower was worried. The Ardennes had thin coverage. He had warned Bradley several times. Eisenhower's broad front strategy spread the troops thin. Additional troops were on the way but hadn't arrived. Major General Kenneth Strong, the chief of intelligence, warned of a German buildup. He briefed Bradley for 45 minutes. Bradley had plans but didn't act. December 16th, Bradley took the threat with a pinch of salt. Thus, anxious Eisenhower immediately took command. Bradley was sidelined. The Bulge developed. German troops drove a wedge between American units in Bradley's left and right flanks. Bradley's headquarters in Luxembourg was cut off. German efforts wrecked communication networks. They eavesdropped on American radio transmissions. Bradley struggled to control his northern armies. The Bulge formed a classic salient into the American line. A logical option was to attack from the north and south, pinch off the German units, and set them up for destruction. This was clearly Patton's preference, but as the general noted, that isn't the way those gentlemen up north fight. Executing double wing envelopment posed problems despite the desirability of such a maneuver. The 101st Airborne Division moved into Bastogne on December 19th. They became surrounded. They needed relief. Bastogne was the center of the Bulge. not the base. Withdrawing the 101st sounded illogical. It was a vital road junction. Withdrawal without assistance was difficult. At his headquarters in Versailles, Allied Supreme Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower was stunned. He couldn't believe his eyes. Hitler had launched a massive offensive. In the meantime, junior officers and senior enlisted personnel led the defense. From December 16th to the 20th, they held the line. Without them, the German threat could have been far more serious, their success more striking. Several cases illustrate this. The Green 99th Infantry Division held terrain on the right flank of the heaviest force assembled by the Germans for the offensive, the 6th Panzer Army. The 99th, a part of Gouraud's 5th Corps, had only been in the line since November. They had not seen major operations. A battalion of the German 3rd Parachute Division moved near Lanzarote, a small Belgian town. They encountered the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon of the 394th Regiment from the 99th Infantry Division, commanded by a 20-year-old lieutenant, Lyle Buch. The platoon's 17 men survived preparatory shelling in the foxholes. They engaged the German paratroopers with small arms fire. With nothing heavier than a .50 caliber Browning machine gun, Buch and his men held their position. They exacted a horrible toll on the advancing Germans. One author states that the Americans caused over 50% casualties. They fought doggedly, but not for too long. 19th of December. The Americans finally surrendered. This was the largest single surrender of U.S. troops since the fall of the Philippines, an embarrassment to the U.S. Army. But one U.S. regimental combat team remained ready to resist, the 424th Infantry Regiment of the 106th Infantry Division. This unit was joined by Combat Command B of the 7th Armored Division. It was led by the newly promoted Brigadier General Bruce C. Clark. Clark, though junior, was energetic. He created an ad hoc defense force centered on the Belgian town of St. Vith. Like Bastogne, further south, his town was a crucial road junction. The Germans needed paved roads for their mechanized forces. With Clark's hard-nosed determination, the ad hoc force succeeded. They denied the Germans the necessary westward road network. Further south, near Luxembourg town of Hossingen, 2 companies of the 28th Infantry Division sat astride the important north-south roadway, known as Skyline Drive. Eisenhower, in command, called for a high-level session. Eisenhower was grim-faced. He saw the German counterattack as an opportunity. The Germans were out in the open, vulnerable. Patton agreed, suggesting they let the Germans dance further to cut them off. Eisenhower emphasized the enemy must not cross the Meuse. He directed Patton to launch a counterattack once the German drive culminated. Patton was to attack with at least 6 divisions. When asked when he could start, Patton confidently replied, the morning of December 21st with 3 divisions. Eisenhower was irritated, but Patton was serious. His staff had been planning since December 9th. They anticipated a German attack. After the meeting, Patton gave the code word. His army stopped and turned 90 degrees. They prepared to attack the German flank. One of Patton's most spectacular accomplishments was about to unfold. December 19th to 20th. Eisenhower made 2 critical decisions. First, at Verdun, Patton was placed in charge of an attack on the German left flank under Bradley's command, but it's Patton's counterattack. Second, a surprising move. Eisenhower calls Bradley on December 20th. The 1st and 9th Armies, cut off by the German Bulge, were placed under Field Marshal Bernard's command. By December 20th, command relationships on the Western Front changed. General Omar Bradley, his top aide, acted fast. Reinforcements were sent. The German advance slowed. Progress became uneven. By December 21st, the Germans were impeded by a roadblock at Bastogne in southern Belgium. The 101st Airborne Division of the Allies had rushed in and formed defensive lines around the city. It held the Germans at bay despite relentless artillery fire. Inside Bastogne, American soldiers gathered from all fronts. A German military delegation demanded surrender. General Anthony McAuliffe's response was stark. He exclaimed, "Nuts!" The most serious casualty for the Germans was time. For a day, 18 men deprived the Germans of the Lanzarote Road. They deprived the 3rd Parachute Division of speed. This was a significant accomplishment for a small group of soldiers. They held at all costs. In the center of the U.S. positions was another Green Division. Major General Allen Jones commanded it. 2 of its regimental combat teams were forward of the main U.S. line. Some companies occupied bunkers that were once part of the German Siegfried Line. The German advance had been stalled. This news spread like wildfire. The American morale soared. The weather cleared. On December 22nd, the fog lifted. Hundreds of Allied planes filled the sky. Supplies were dropped into Bastogne. German positions were attacked. By December 24th, the 101st stood firm. Its resilient men provided a psychological boost for the American army that could find few, if any, victories in that first week of the German offensive. December 28th, Eisenhower met Montgomery. They discussed the plan. Eisenhower sought a commitment for a counterattack. Montgomery's commitment was elusive. Patton's attack was well underway. Bastogne was relieved on December 26. Montgomery moved slowly. He waited for another German push. The First Army needed reorganization. Reserves were required. Eisenhower's impatience grew. He demanded a rapid response. If the Germans resumed their offensive, Montgomery must attack on January 3rd. The meeting was tense, and Eisenhower felt the weight of command. Montgomery raised the issue of ground component command. He wanted control of the 12th Army Group. The argument from September resurfaced. They met privately. The meeting burdened Eisenhower. Relations reached a crisis on December 30th. Montgomery sent a message. It enraged Eisenhower. Montgomery insisted on control of both army groups. He warned of potential failures. Allied unity was at stake. At this moment, a peacemaker emerged. Montgomery's chief of staff, Major General Francis Freddy de Guingamp, sensed the crisis. He flew to Eisenhower's headquarters. The weather was treacherous. Guingamp's fears were realized. Eisenhower drafted a message to Marshall. He stated this crisis with Montgomery. He could no longer work with the field marshal. One had to go. Guingamp was horrified. He asked Eisenhower for time. Eisenhower allowed only 24 hours for resolution. The clock began to tick. Montgomery's fate was sealed. The rationale for SHAEF commander was clear. If Marshall and the combined chiefs took Eisenhower's ultimatum seriously, Montgomery's position was weak. The American army dominated the ground. American industry fueled the war effort. America had the resources to end the war. Eisenhower's popularity soared among troops and the nation. It was unlikely he would step aside. However, the British press idolized Montgomery for his victories. How could he be relieved? Guingamp had 24 hours. He used them well. He convinced Montgomery that Eisenhower wanted his relief. He warned that Field Marshal Alexander might replace him. A deflated Montgomery let Guingamp write the message. He apologized to Eisenhower. He asked him to tear up the December 30th message. Crisis averted, but relations remained rocky. Hitler's commanders were in trouble. The plan was to sweep north across the Meuse River to Antwerp. They aimed to trap the Allied armies within a week. They would capture Allied fuel depots, but none was achieved. After a week, they had barely reached the Meuse. No fuel was captured. However, counterattacks from a regrouped Allied force intensified. The generals begged Hitler to change the plan. Once more, and for the last time in his life, Hitler said no. It was always the frontline Germans who paid the cost of Hitler's stubbornness. 16-year-olds, pushed into service, fought recklessly. They were raised on Hitler's Nazi ideals, and they died by hundreds. Allied soldiers, seeing their young faces, felt both sadness and anger. Hitler celebrated the Christmas Day of that year with his generals. The next day, the Western Allies unleashed its fury. From the air and on the ground, they attacked. Bastogne, which was cut off for a week, was relieved by Patton's tanks. Hitler's Operation Watch on the Rhine was doomed. The gamble had failed. Inside Hitler's bunker, the generals shouted and quarreled. Chaos had erupted. Even Hermann Göring, his oldest comrade, pleaded for an armistice. He was one of the most powerful figures in the Nazi Party and was close to Hitler. But Hitler still refused. He ordered 25,000 relief troops to the Ardennes. He even threatened Göring with execution if he sought peace. The operation would continue. The Führer insisted. He ordered a second offensive further southward. By now, British intelligence was deciphering the German strategy via Enigma. They replayed Hitler's directives to General Eisenhower. A second possible attack by the Germans could be sensed. Eisenhower's frustration grew. Montgomery's slow buildup for a counterattack irked him. Montgomery's caution was not what Eisenhower wanted. He sought rapid, decisive action like Patton's. Instead, delays mounted. As the Allies' response began, starting with Patton's attack, they faced two more German offensives. German planners had anticipated a flank attack by the Third Army. They devised a ground offense in Alsace, France. The operation, called Northwind, aimed to relieve pressure on German spearheads trying to reach Antwerp. Jacob Lux Devers' 6th Army Group had to counter this operation. This was no easy task. When the Ardennes offensive was launched, Devers had to extend his boundary northward. This allowed Patton's Third Army to withdraw divisions and make a 90-degree turn. Devers' line now covered nearly 200 miles. To complicate matters, part of his force was composed of Free French units, which were not on par with the Americans in training or capability. Devers, like the 12th Army Group, also faced a shortage of replacements. Devers was still fortunate. German officers didn't impose the same secrecy for Operation Northwind as they did for the Ardennes offensive. Since late November, intelligence indicated a possible German attack. Devers and Eisenhower had time to plan for a second offensive. By Christmas Eve 1944, a German attack seemed certain. The only question was when. The Germans answered on New Year's Eve. Without any artillery preparation, they attacked. On January 3, 1945, the Allied response around the Bulge was in motion. The Americans launched a two-pronged attack. Foggy weather and icy roads hampered progress. German field commanders used skillful defensive tactics, but the Americans kept up the pressure. The German army, despite initial successes, had stalled. It wasn't obvious to Allied soldiers, but the German attack was in trouble from the start. Their key vulnerabilities were lack of fuel and support. Even capturing U.S. fuel dumps wouldn't solve their problem. Fuel was the German army's Achilles heel. Mechanized units needed speed, but they lacked the fuel to keep advancing. British forces, led by Field Marshal Montgomery, joined the fight. Montgomery took temporary command of the American 1st and 9th Armies. His forces closed in from the north. Patton's Third Army advanced from the south. A giant noose formed around the German position. Another operation that was launched at this time was called Operation Bodenplatte. It was unleashed exactly on New Year's. The Luftwaffe aimed to cripple Allied air forces in the Low Countries. The goal was to gain air superiority during the Battle of the Bulge. The plan was a surprise attack on 17 Allied air bases in Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. Destroy as many Allied aircraft, hangars, and airstrips as possible. Every available fighter and fighter-bomber unit was redeployed. Night fighter and medium bomber units acted as pathfinders. The strike force was mostly Messerschmitt, Bf-109, and Focke-Wulf FW-190 fighters. But there was a blunder in the German planning. Flight paths took many units over heavily defended areas like V2 launch sites around The Hague. These sites were protected by numerous German anti-aircraft artillery units. Air Command West had 267 heavy and 277 medium or light AAA batteries, plus 100 Kriegsmarine AAA batteries along the Dutch coast. Most were in the sector of the 16th AAA Division. Some AAA units were warned about the operation but not updated on changes. The result was devastating. 1/4 of German fighter units lost aircraft to friendly fire before the attacks began. After 5 years of war, many Luftwaffe pilots were inexperienced and poorly trained. A shortage of experienced instructors and limited aviation fuel hampered training. Long-range Allied fighters shot down many training aircraft. No safe areas for training existed by late 1944. Poorly trained pilots were quickly lost in combat or accidents, creating a vicious cycle. Allied personnel noted the poor aim of strafing aircraft. Many Luftwaffe planes were shot down by Allied anti-aircraft fire. They flew too slowly and too high. The operation was a disaster for the Germans. Hitler had no choice left. He had to retreat. Some units didn't escape in time. Over 20,000 men were captured east of Bastogne on January 16th. The American 1st and 3rd Armies linked up, tying the noose. In the American headquarters, celebrations began. But at the same time, the generals started claiming they were responsible for victory. General Eisenhower faced a storm, not just the weather. His top commanders' egos clashed. Patton, Montgomery, all argued. The press watched every word, every gesture. History was being written. Montgomery's comments stirred controversy. He implied he saved the Americans. Generals were furious. Montgomery apologized. Tension eased. For the Germans, the Battle of the Ardennes was devastating. The cost to the German Wehrmacht was substantial. 120,000 soldiers lost, 600 to 800 tanks, and assault guns gone. Nearly half of their armored forces in the Ardennes lost. Irreplaceable. Survivors retreated. For the Luftwaffe, the cost was even higher. Operations Northwind and Bodenplatte cost them close to 800 aircraft, 280 on New Year's Day alone. The loss of these aircraft and experienced pilots meant the death of the Luftwaffe on the Western Front. By the end of the battle, the European campaign was entering its final phases. For Hitler, it was the end. 8 years of offensives over. The battle marked a shift. Nazi fanaticism over logic. Shortages of men and equipment. Fanaticism led to more German deaths. The end was near. The German people were about to face a harsh reality. The Führer's contempt for human life extended beyond the Slavs and Jews. It would soon be directed at the Germans themselves. Their failure to achieve his goals had consequences. Adolf Hitler never admitted his mistakes, never accepted responsibility. As the thousand-year Reich crumbled in early 1945, he blamed the German people. He blamed the military. Timid, disloyal, incompetent, he called them. If only they had listened to him. If only they had his will and determination. Everything would have been different. The end was near. The Führer's fanaticism would cost many more lives. The German people would pay the price. After the Battle of the Bulge, the Allies advanced from the west, and the Soviets closed in from the east. By April 1945, Soviet forces had encircled Berlin. In his bunker, deep beneath the city, Hitler faced the inevitable. On April 30, 1945, as Soviet troops stormed Berlin, Hitler took his own life. His death marked the end of the Third Reich. Berlin fell shortly after. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945. The war in Europe was over. The world took a sigh of relief. The significance of this battle was immense. On January 18, 1945, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill made a powerful statement. He declared, "Undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the war." Churchill was referring to the Battle of the Bulge. He highlighted the key strategic moves by U.S. forces and the tens of thousands of casualties suffered by U.S. troops. Now, let's look at the reasons that caused the Germans to fail this battle. The most obvious reason that is alluded to the failure of the Germans in their offensive is that they faced several logistical challenges, among which fuel shortages was the most significant one. The German offensive heavily relied on their armored divisions. These required vast amounts of fuel. However, they faced severe fuel shortages, which crippled their ability to maintain momentum and advance. Next, their supply lines were often cut off. The harsh weather and the rugged terrain of the Ardennes made it difficult to supply their troops. This led to delays and shortages of essential supplies, including ammunition and food for the troops. Most importantly, the Allied resistance was remarkable. According to Winston S. Churchill, taken by surprise, Eisenhower and his commanders acted swiftly, but they will agree that the major credit lies elsewhere. In Montgomery's words, the Battle of the Ardennes was won primarily by the staunch fighting qualities of the American soldier. American troops, particularly the 101st Airborne Division at Bastogne, put up a fierce resistance despite being surrounded and outnumbered. Their determination and resilience slowed down the German advance significantly. The Allies were also able to quickly mobilize reinforcements. General Patton's Third Army made a rapid and decisive move to relieve Bastogne, which was the turning point in the battle. Allies also enjoyed air superiority. The initial German attack was a surprise, but Allied intelligence quickly caught on. Ultra intercepts from the cracked Enigma code revealed German plans, troop movement, and vital information. General Dwight D. Eisenhower and his commanders adjusted their strategies. They made informed decisions. This turned the tide. Allied air power was crucial. Winter weather grounded aircraft for days, but when the skies cleared, American and British fighter bombers took to the air. P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs wreaked havoc. They targeted German supply lines and troop concentrations. The Allies shuttled reinforcements and supplies by air, especially to the besieged garrison at Bastogne. This proved decisive. Aircraft P-47 Thunderbolt attacked 10,123 times, dropping 6,800 tons of bombs. P-51 Mustang struck 4,950 times and dropped 1,300 tons of bombs, while B-26 Marauder launched 1,235 assaults and dropped 3,700 tons of bombs. In addition, the Allies had two key intelligence advantages. First, they used Ultra information to understand German military capabilities. Ultra provided Allied analysts with access to OKW messages and German Kriegsmarine communications. They could also decode messages from the state railway system. This railway data detailed insight into the movement of military assets and the economy's condition. It also provided reliable orders of battle information. Secondly, the Allies had numerous human intelligence sources called the HUMIT. These sources were from citizens in occupied France, Belgium, and Holland. The weather was another decisive factor in this battle. At the beginning of this video, we told you that the Germans initially benefited from poor weather conditions, which grounded Allied air support. However, as the weather improved, the Allies regained air superiority, which allowed them to launch devastating air attacks on German positions and supply lines. There were also some strategic miscalculations on the Germans' part. They underestimated the speed and efficiency with which the Allies could mobilize reinforcements. They also misjudged the resilience and fighting spirit of the American troops. Their plans were also most of the time over-ambitious, such as the plan to capture Antwerp and split the Allied forces was overly ambitious. Finally, German troops were exhausted from continuous fighting on multiple fronts. Their morale was low, and they were not as motivated as the Allied forces, which were fighting to liberate occupied lands. German military forces showed surprising resilience in the Ardennes. Operation Northwind was launched. Despite declining strength, the Wehrmacht still flashed signs of life. By January, the Germans had lost the initiative in the Ardennes. Without surprise and with a shortage of reserves, their success with Operation Northwind was fleeting. The Battle of the Bulge officially ended on January 28th. However, many German officers knew by December 19th that the offensive had failed. Astute generals like Rundstedt and Model knew it never had a chance. German units failed to achieve Hitler's objectives, except for surprise. The operation was unsuccessful. Hitler ordered the withdrawal of elite SS formulations from the Bulge on January 8th. And finally, the Ardennes offensive was the defining part of the European campaign for the American Army. Montgomery entered the battle on December 20th, bringing elements of the British Army. Yet, the Ardennes was largely an American battle. It proved that American soldiers and their leaders had learned and applied the art of war effectively. Hit by an attacking force that achieved total surprise, units on the ground showed maturity and resilience. The Battle of the Bulge was a significant test for American forces. Without consistent air support, the American Army had to fight head-to-head with the once mighty Wehrmacht. The American soldier clearly showed his competence. Eisenhower, despite lacking direct combat experience, emerged as a competent leader in late 1944. When the crisis erupted on December 16th, he quickly took charge. Whether his strategy was right or wrong, Eisenhower was consistent. From start to finish, he stuck with his broad front strategy. Moreover, the men around him were just like their leader, decisive and heroic. We have already seen that Germany was defeated in this battle. Let's see what happened afterward. The Allies regained all lost ground by January 1945. German forces were in disarray. The once formidable Wehrmacht was now a shadow of its former self. The Allies seized the momentum. They launched a relentless push into Germany. The Western Front was collapsing. The Eastern Front was no better. Soviet forces were advancing rapidly. They had already crossed the Vistula River. Berlin was their target. In the following month, the Allied leaders met to discuss the final phase of the war. This meeting was called the Yalta Conference. They planned the invasion of Germany. The end was in sight, but the fighting was far from over. The next month, the Allies crossed the Rhine. German defenses crumbled. Cities fell one by one. Cologne, Frankfurt, and then the industrial heartland, the Ruhr. The Luftwaffe was grounded. Fuel shortages and Allied air superiority ensured that. Then the Soviets reached the outskirts of Berlin. The city was encircled. Hitler's dream of a 1,000-year Reich was in ruins. Inside his bunker, he issued desperate orders. But it was too late. The Third Reich was collapsing. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler took his own life. The man who had plunged the world into war was dead. Germany surrendered. The Second World War was over. The once mighty German war machine lay in ruins. The Battle of the Bulge was a turning point. It marked the beginning of the end for the Nazi Germany. Thank you for watching our documentary on why the Germans lost the Battle of the Bulge. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling and informative content. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know in the comments which battle you'd like us to cover next. Your suggestions help us create the content you want to watch.